Amazing. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. We might just wait one extra minute just to make sure that there's, some last stragglers coming in. And then we'll get started. It should be a good session. There's lots of people here today, which is awesome. Alrighty. Well, we might get started. It's 12:33 and we've got a pretty busy schedule today. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today. So I'm joining from the land of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I would like to recognise their continuing connection and care of land, waters and community, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So hello everyone, my name is Molly Saunders. I'm the postgrad portfolio leader for TASA, and I'm super excited to be hosting this webinar today, which is transitioning beyond the PhD, fellowships, publishing and pathways. Xavier Mills is another member of the postgrad steering committee. He has done amazing work putting this webinar together today. So I'd just like to give a massive thanks to him as well. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it because he's unwell. But yeah, he's done a great job putting this together and organizing these speakers. So today's session is on transitioning from your PhD research into the next stage of your academic or professional career. And that is a time, I think, for a lot of PhD students or early career researchers that's both very exciting. There's a lot of opportunity and hope, and you're thinking about what you want to do, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. And so I think for this reason, one of the things that we've heard as the postgrad subcommittee is that a lot of our members, a lot of our postgraduate members are really interested and wanting to know more about what comes next. So we did a survey, which I'm sure many of you participated in at the start of the year, and we were told that one of the main things that people want to know about is how to find postdocs, how to manage that post-submission period. Learning about what career options there are post finishing your PhD and that kind of thing. So to help us today and to help us explore those topics, we have two fantastic researchers that are going to be sharing their practical insights and their own experiences. So in the first part of the session, we will be hearing from Dr. Laura Davy, who's a DECRA Research Fellow at the Australian National University. And she's going to be talking about her experiences of finishing a PhD and then securing, competitive fellowships and building her independent research profile. And then in the second part of today, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Evangeline Aguas, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney. And she's going to talk about her experience of turning her doctoral thesis into a published book. And she'll be kind of reflecting on developing a sustainable publishing strategy early in her career, I believe. So each of our speakers is going to chat to us for about 15 minutes, and then there'll be, each person will be followed by a short Q&A. So feel free to post your questions in the chat as we go, or to note them down for discussion afterwards and raise your hands. And then at the end of both speaker presentations, we'll have another kind of open floor situation where you can ask any other questions that you have. So first up, we have Dr. Laura Davy, who, as I said, is a DECRA Research Fellow at the ANU, whose work examines disability, care and social inclusion. She has very successfully, I would say, navigated the post-PhD transition and will share her experiences applying for fellowships and of building an independent academic profile. So thank you so much and welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Molly, for that lovely introduction. So folks, I have not prepared a formal presentation. Instead, I'm going to speak probably for a little bit less time, maybe 10 minutes or so, and give you, I guess, my origin story from new PhD graduate to DECRA Fellow with tenure, whatever that means in these crazy times in the Australian higher education sector. So I completed my PhD in 2017, which I calculated this morning is 8 years ago. And I did my PhD in the Department of Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Sydney. I always felt a little bit like a fraud as a sociologist, to be honest, because so many of my compatriots in the sociology program were doing amazing, extensive fieldwork. Whereas my thesis was conceptual. It was a kind of theory building piece of work. And I had just come from doing a Masters of Political Theory at the London School of Economics. And so I think my field for the PhD, at least, was more in political and ethical theory. But I started to branch out post-PhD into more applied social policy analysis. So I think one of the overarching narratives to my origin story post-PhD is about being flexible in the way that you see yourself as a researcher and as a scholar and an academic. But also always keeping true to the things that light your imagination on fire when it comes to research, keeping true to the things that you're passionate about and that you really care about. And so for me, that is the field of disability studies. So I think that part of my uncomfortableness with labeling myself in disciplinary terms is that this field of research is intrinsically very, very cross and interdisciplinary in nature. Luckily, my uncomfortableness with identifying as a sociologist didn't worry my supervisors in the Department of Sociology because Dinesh Waterwell and Danielle Selamaya, although they're professors in the Department of Sociology, often call themselves political theorists or socio-legal theorists and sociologists when they want to. So my PhD was about theories of personal autonomy and self-determination and how these theories can help us to understand the position of people with disability in contemporary society, particularly people with intellectual disability or cognitive disability, who are a group of persons that have often been dismissed in the field of political theory in which I was contributing. But towards the end of the thesis, I started to explore how theories of personal autonomy can inform the way we think about contemporary social policy as well. Reforms like the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which are premised on these notions of choice and control and individuals negotiating the best funding package that they can in order to live the best life that they can. So I was borrowing from philosophy and political theory to help us understand how that actually works out in practice. But fast forward to, I think it was December 2017 when I submitted my thesis, and I was looking for work, something that I'm sure many of you are doing at the moment or will be doing soon once you have completed your PhDs. And the work that was going at the time was some casual research assistant work. It was portrayed to me as just a possible 3-month gig at the Social Policy Research Centre at UNSW Sydney. So I started working there on a variety of different, very applied policy projects. So often these projects were funded and commissioned by government agencies, so the Department of Social Services or the National Disability Insurance Agency. And that experience really exposed me to a different way of doing research, much faster paced, much more practical and accessible and applied. Policymakers want, a maximum 20-page report, preferably a 5-page report. They don't want to read 100,000 words of dense theory building. And this experience ended up being really formative for the kind of researcher and the kinds of jobs and the kind of research projects that I'm doing now. Because it changed my orientation a little bit. I was still working in the field that I was passionate about, still advocating for the people I wish to advocate in the same ways as I was in my PhD, but it was in this very, very different genre. And I stayed working at the SPRC, the Social Policy Research Centre, for almost a year, but it was on a full-time casual research officer contract. So this was a really important time for me in terms of building my skills and expanding my horizons, making me a more versatile and agile researcher for the market, I guess. But it was also quite a stressful time. Insecure work is hard. Working full-time but on a casual research contract is hard. You don't get sick leave, you don't get holiday leave. So I was really relieved when I saw an advertisement for a postdoc, a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Canberra. Now, it was a good thing that I'd done this casual research work at SPRC, because otherwise I wouldn't have seen myself as the sort of person who could apply for this postdoc, I think, because it was with the Public Service Research Group located in a school of business at UNSW Sydney on the grounds of the Australian Defence Force Academy. So for political theorist and philosopher Laura, this seemed like a really big stretch. But the person who was hiring was looking for someone who was interested in disability research, and it was the kind of postdoc that you would want to throw your hat into the ring for. It was what I call a holy grail postdoc. It was not attached to someone's project. You had 2 years just to work on your own research, whatever that may be. Turning your PhD into a book never happened to me, so I'll be listening intently to Evangeline's presentation in a moment. Working on journal articles from your PhD, collaborating with people within that school, and so on. So it seemed like a fabulous opportunity, and when I got that role, even though it was just a 2-year contract, I and my very supportive partner moved to Canberra, hoping to make it in the capital, hoping to extend this postdoc in some way or look for other opportunities. And at that time, I had the life circumstances, the flexibility that I was able to do that. So it was 2 years in length. And I spent the last 6 months of that contract on maternity leave because I had my first baby during that period, which was just before COVID. So we're up to about 2019 now. So I guess some other lessons around being versatile is don't restrict yourself in the types of jobs that you might be applying for because you don't think you fit the mold. It's quite possible that you do, or that you can if you, sorry to use such mercantile language, but if you market yourself in that sort of way. I thought I had skills that I could bring to policy analysis and public service analysis that would be interesting for this particular research group. I've kind of skirted over the fact that I probably applied for about 15 jobs before I got the 2-year postdoc at UNSW Canberra though. I was aiming high. I was applying for lectureships, probably a little bit naively, thinking that my tutoring experience and my 1 or 2 publications by that time was enough of a research profile to get me one of those lectureships. it wasn't yet, but it was really good practice applying for those jobs, and really good practice in pitching my ongoing research projects in different ways to different audiences as well. So then I heard about another postdoc that was being offered at the Crawford School of Public Policy at ANU. So again, you can see how these opportunities are really building on each other. I'm not sure I would have gotten the Crawford School Research Fellowship if I hadn't worked at the Public Service Research Group, and that position I don't think I would have gotten if I hadn't had that applied policy experience in contract research at SPRC. But at Crawford, I had the opportunity to, I think, bring my disparate strands together finally, because Crawford is a very respected kind of scholarly centre of research. They're interested in theory about policy processes, about how the state interacts with its citizens, but they're also interested in policy impact. So being able to bring those strands together and actually start initiating and leading my own research projects in the field that I care about was a wonderful opportunity at that point. And after about just a year in that research fellowship position, a space opened up on the faculty in the Department of Policy and Governance, where I work now. So again, thinking it was a long shot, I threw my hat into the ring for that one, and it was really lucky to get a continuing lectureship position at Crawford. And the reason that Xavier invited me to speak today was really to focus on the DECRA. So this is the Australian Research Council's Discovery Early Career Researcher Award. But I think it's a difficult thing to talk about DECRAs with people who are currently PhD candidates, because perhaps once upon a time back in the day, a Discovery Early Career Research Fellowship or similar was something that would bridge people who did not yet have a continuing academic position from their PhD studies and into a position where they could focus on their research for another 3 years and hopefully secure a continuing position afterwards. I just don't think that that is really the case anymore. The people who are getting DECRAs are increasingly people who have already secured tenured positions. They are increasingly senior lecturers, associate professors, even professors. This is because of the competition for fellowships like this is just so fierce. So the bar just keeps getting pushed in terms of how much of an independent research profile you need to have already demonstrated before you can secure that fellowship. So I am absolutely happy to talk more about the DECRA if that's something that people are interested in. So let me know in the Q&A. But I thought it was important to tell a bit more of a story about happenstance, how people fall into things because it's a window of opportunity at the right time for them, and at the right time for the place that is hiring, and that the bits and pieces of work that you do, sometimes much of it is insecure at the beginning of your academic career, how that actually adds up over time to build that independent research profile that you need to secure something like an ARC DECRA. In terms of my fellowship, Xavier also asked me to talk about where I'm up to in it, what the experience is so far. And I have to admit that I've only just started it. So it's a 2025 award, but what I didn't know when I first received the notification that I had been successful in November last year was that you can actually start it at any point during the calendar year of 2025. And given the chaos of the Australian National University over the past while, I thought it might be strategic to actually push the start date because this sort of fellowship actually pays for your salary over that 3 years. So in a time when people are being fired at the drop of a hat, it seemed like an extra, I guess, blanket of protection in these volatile times. It also gave me the opportunity to finish up some important work that I'm currently doing with your lovely TASA postgrad convener, Molly Saunders, as well here at ANU. So I might leave it there with my origin story narrative, and please let me know if you have specific questions, whether they're about the DECRA, whether they're about applying for different roles, or about what it means to kind of put together the academic portfolio that makes you competitive for those sorts of roles.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really, really interesting. Even for me, who knew a lot about that stuff, it was really interesting to hear your reflections. I'm going to open it up to everyone else now to see if you have any questions for Laura, as she said, about either the DECRA or applying for jobs, being flexible and interdisciplinary. You can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. Yeah, Jacqueline.
Hello. Thank you for focusing on the story. And from hearing from other people, DECRAs are basically beyond anybody that I've heard to that's just finished a PhD. Like it's not a thing that is feasible for us to apply for at this point. Anyway, my question kind of was a bit of a practical one. Like, where do you find the jobs that you're kind of looking for? Do you go to the websites? Do you email people about things? Like, are there, like, I know there's places like ethical jobs and other things that will often have listings for the kinds of research and things that the research jobs that we're applying for, but like, where do you practically go to find this stuff? Or is there a lot of word of mouth? Like, I know there's a lot of luck and word of mouth and all of that kind of stuff, but like, are there any tips in that respect?
Yeah, definitely. So the actual formal recruitment process jobs, so the postdocs I'm talking about here, I found through Times Higher Education jobs, seek.com, ethical jobs. I was basically subscribed to all of them in that post-PhD time, and just jumped on anything that looked remotely relevant to me and gave it a crack. In terms of the initial casual research work, that was very much word of mouth. Disability studies in Australia is a reasonably small field. People tend to know each other. And so I had told my supervisors that I was looking for work, in fact, anxious about finding some work post-PhD, and someone actually got in contact with me directly from SBRC saying we're looking for someone to write a literature review. It'll just be a 3-month job, but it expanded from then. What also proved to be really important, though, was the contacts that I didn't realise that I had. So I think the reason that I got the first 2-year postdoc at UNSW Canberra was that someone who knew the person who was hiring vouched for me. And the person who vouched for me I'd only met a few times at conferences, but sometimes that sort of reputation stuff really matters. So who you know, but not necessarily in that. I've never been an active networker, proactively emailing people. I see that as probably hassling them. So I'm not encouraging anyone to do that. I think that that can actually turn people off. But I think being present, going to conferences, meeting people in your field, being nice and chatting to them, all of that really, really does help quite a lot.
Yeah, I suppose speaks to the value of networking. But yes, thank you very much.
Jay, did you have a question?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Laura, appreciate it. And like you said, there's kind of a bit of a sense of the bar getting higher for things like DECRA, etc. Just in terms of the kind of, I appreciate your story about sort of following the breadcrumbs of sort of roles as they go along. Do you have a sense, we're in a pretty interesting kind of environment in terms of higher education at the moment, with lots of pressure on lots of unis? Do you have a sense of the breadcrumbs that are out there? Do you think that we're actually in a time where there's probably less breadcrumbs around, or is that the sky is always falling?
Oh, I mean, there might be. It's hard for me to tell from my vantage point whether it's worse now than it was 8 years ago. It seemed pretty dire then. Like, it's been a couple of decades of kind of decline under the neoliberal university model, right? This has been going for a while. You do have to be constantly sniffing to find the breadcrumbs, and that becomes tedious and stressful. It certainly does. But I think there are still some opportunities out there. Yeah, I don't want to be too pessimistic about the outlook, but it looks really grim. I'm sorry. Yeah.
All right, we might take one more question and then head over to Evangeline. So Catherine, did you want to ask yours?
Yes, thank you. Hi. So thanks a lot for that, Laura. I'm kind of in a similar situation to you in that through, a weird pathway of luck and stuff like that, I ended up getting a continuing position. So I'm in a continuation position currently, and I want to apply for DECRA sort of at the end of next year or something like that. So I was just curious about the DECRA application process. Like, was there I don't know, it seemed like too much to just broadly ask about it. So maybe what was the thing that was most challenging or something like that?
Start planning now. A year out is good practice, and it gives you the opportunity to really refine it towards the end, get input from lots of people. So bother your colleagues, ask them to review it, and this includes people who aren't in your specific field, because the people who actually assess and decide who gets the DECRA award are people who are social scientists, a really broad camp. You have to write it in a way that sets their imagination alight and makes them think, this is an exciting project. I really want to fund this. And I think you can only get to that point if you've given it a lot of lead time. So I don't mean you're crafting the whole thing from now, but I do mean that you're jotting down notes that you have, starting to talk about your ideas with critical friends, starting to refine things like your methodology, chipping away at your literature review and kind of rationale or background section as well. I think that's really important. And don't underestimate just how hard the rope statement, which is the record of something I've forgotten, sorry. It's basically where you tell your story as a researcher and how much impact you've made given the opportunities that have been afforded to you. It's quite a short statement, but you have to strike this balance between bragging wholeheartedly about, impossible claims really of the impact that you've made. We're all early career researchers. Chances are we haven't made a huge impact yet, but you kind of say that you have, but in a modest way at the same time, so you don't come across as terribly arrogant. It's a tricky piece of persuasive writing. So my other piece of advice would be gather as many example DECRAs, preferably successful examples, but it can be useful looking at the ones that didn't get it as well, partly because you'll see that many of them are exceedingly excellent And it's really just, it can come down to things like, does that particular set of assessors appreciate the field that you're trying to work in? It is still a luck of the draw sort of moment as well. But yeah, see some samples so that you can start to think in that writing style, that persuasive grant writing style, because that for me was the most different thing about it. I'd written a thesis, I'd written journal articles, but a grant application, a proposal like that is a different genre altogether. And it takes a particular style of writing, and writing, you know, people often think once you know what your idea is, it will write itself. It never writes itself. Writing is really hard, so leave enough time for it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thank you so much for all of your insights. We'll have a little bit of extra time at the end for you to answer any other questions people think of in the meantime. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Evangeline. So Dr. Evangeline Aguas is a senior lecturer at the UTS and is the author of Queer Interruptions, Temporality in Femslash Fandom. She'll be sharing her journey of transforming her thesis into a monograph, as well as her broader advice for early career researchers in building a publication profile. So welcome, Evangeline, and thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. My name is Evangeline Aguas. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a lecturer in digital and social media here at the University of Technology, Sydney. I've noticed that I think in those bios, I'm listed as a senior lecturer, but I'm not. I'm actually a lecturer. So just wanted to put that there. So Xavier asked me to come in today to talk about my process of turning my thesis into a book. I'd first like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands I'm joining you from today, and I acknowledge that First Nation sovereignty was never ceded. I also pay respect to elders, past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Okay, so I began my PhD in 2018, and my thesis was titled Feeling Backward, Temporality and Queer Female Fandom. So my research focused on queer female and genderqueer fans and how they experienced queer time. So I explored how queer fans deviated from heteronormative life trajectories, and how the repetition of tropes like the bury your gaze trope, where queer characters are often killed off on screen, how the repetition of these tropes could trigger experiences of melancholia for queer fans. Now, as part of my research, I also created an online documentary where I interviewed fans about their experiences of queer time, and the design of the website itself also reflected main themes within queer time, so non-linearity, repetition, and things like that. So from this non-traditional PhD project, I eventually published a book titled Queer Interruptions, Temporality in Femslash Fandom. It was published in January of this year as part of the Palgrave Fan Studies series. And the documentary videos have also been integrated into the book. So you need to download the publisher's app called the SN More Media app. And then you can scan a link in the text of the book, and then it'll show a video on your phone. So you can have the video and also the actual book itself alongside each other. So I'll tell you a little bit about the journey. I just want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert in the publishing world at all. Yeah, I just simply wanted to share my experience, hopefully share some resources with you as well. So starting from the initial proposal, I looked at the Palgrave pivot format because you could publish at shorter lengths. So my thesis, because I had that creative component, my thesis wasn't 100,000 words, it was like 50,000. And so the pivot length was really great for me. It meant that I didn't have to add extra chapters. And the publishing process is also quite fast. And this was important because I was hoping to apply for a full-time lecturer position. And having a book contract would be really valuable in my job application. So the timing of the publication was also really important for me. So you can share your book idea with Palgrave Pivot just on their website. They have an online form, and I just want to highlight this field here. Like, so you've got, the name and languages and the summary, but here where it says current stage, here are the options that you can select. I think the fact that you can select that you have a draft manuscript already available, I think this is a real advantage of turning your thesis into a book. It's not a concept. This is not going to take years of writing before you get to the manuscript submission point. So I think, yeah, that's one of the main advantages of having your thesis already examined or submitted. And actually highlighting that in your proposal is really important too. Also highlighting anything that makes your project or your research unique. So for me, that was my creative component. So talking about how the text and the online documentary complemented each other, but for you, that might be different. And also attaching some sample writing is really important too. So attaching a sample chapter would be really great for the initial proposal. So after I submitted this online form, I was contacted 2 weeks later by a senior editor at Palgrave who requested a full proposal. So I'm just going to show you the full proposal now. Publishing proposal. Okay, hopefully you can see this. Yes. Okay, so this is the template that they sent me. So you can see, your brief description, subtitle, things like that. But it's really important to add as much detail as you can. So where it says proposed content, you need to provide, hopefully, like an abstract for each chapter. So again, the fact that you have a manuscript already, you know what the chapters contain, you can write those detailed chapter descriptions. So that's really important. Another area that I want to highlight is this market and competition area. So this is probably something that you haven't thought about when you're writing your thesis. How am I going to market this? So this is where you probably need to put a different hat on and do some, some independent research here. So who's the main audience for your work? Could it be used in coursework? What kinds of subjects would it be taught in? Gender studies, media studies, etc. Secondary markets. And then thinking about 3 to 4 unique selling points about the project as well. So these are things probably that you haven't already thought about. So being prepared to look at those or having those in mind. Also having an idea of the competition. So what other existing publications are related to yours. And here I want to highlight that they have asked you to look at what is already in their publishing program. So what have they already published that's similar to yours? Because they don't want to publish the same thing twice, obviously. So you need to differentiate between what's already in their catalog, basically. And then again, here you've got like additional information, so 5 to 6 keywords. Has any of it been published previously? Okay, so this is something to keep in mind if you're publishing journal articles from your thesis as well. So what percentage of the final manuscript will have been published already in journal articles, book chapters and things like that. Oh, and like these things, I think because they're quite expensive for books. Do you have any tables, images, diagrams and things like that? Here, could you provide 3 to 5 experts in your area? So these people would act as the peer reviewers for your proposal. So that's really important as well. And that's it. So I think there was one more thing that I wanted to highlight there, but no. Okay, oh, here, yes. So they've asked, will any interviews be carried out? And I'm assuming that most people have done ethnographic research or interviews with stakeholders in their research. So here it's really important to acknowledge that what permissions are currently in place. So the publisher has an idea of what permissions they will need to then publish the work. Okay, so that's really important to include as well. I'll just go back to my slides. Okay. So I did ask senior colleagues for advice, and I asked to look at their book proposals to see how they approached those sections as well. But some points to consider. Will the book be aligned with a specific event? Okay, so this will help sell your book and demonstrate its relevance. For example, my supervisor was proposing a book on Kylie Minogue. She's a music scholar. And it was going to be aligned with the 35th anniversary of the release of the album Kylie. Okay, so aligning it with those kinds of anniversary events or media events, things like that, can help with your proposal as well. Also look at existing book series within that publisher that you can tailor your proposal towards. So I knew that Palgrave had a fan studies series and that they didn't have anything in that series related to my topic. So I knew that I was going to add something unique to their catalogue. Also adding 1 or 2 sample chapters to your full proposal again. And if you can't do that, then detailed chapter descriptions, because this document is going to go through peer review as well. Okay, so the process, you submit your full proposal. If that is accepted, the publisher will then begin the external peer review process, and that took about 6 to 8 weeks. After the reviewer reports have been received, then you need to formulate an author response, and I was given 2 weeks to do that. So I'll just show you my author response now. Okay, so here you would format it similarly to how you would format your responses to thesis examiner suggestions or queries. So just basically the reviewer's, query and then my response. And the advantage here is that you've already written the manuscript, and so any questions that they have are probably going to relate to what they haven't seen in the manuscript. So you can actually go answer these queries quite comprehensively by saying, actually, I talk about it in this chapter of the manuscript, in this section, here's how I talk about it. So rather than it being a conceptual thing, you've actually done it, okay? So that is a real advantage of starting with your thesis. And I'm happy to share these documents as examples with anyone as well. So just going back to my slides. Okay, and so author response. Yeah, so once you've written the author response, all of these documents here, the proposal, the reviews, and your response then go to the editorial board for review. I was told this process takes about 2 weeks. I heard back in a week, and I received an offer of contract. And this was completed mid-August. So I submitted the full proposal at the beginning of June, and the contracts were signed within 2.5 months. So I guess it's pretty quick, pretty efficient, and then from there, I was able to use the fact that I had a book contract and apply for a lecturer position at UTS. Okay, so the manuscript, just some things to consider. I would consider changing the register, as in tailoring your writing to the audience. So I was hoping mine would be more accessible to a general audience. I was talking about fan communities, queer fans, TV industry, so I was hoping it would have a much broader audience than an academic one. So really making the language more accessible was important to me. I basically had to rewrite the introduction, and I was hoping to rewrite the chapters themselves, but I never got round to it. I just ran out of time. So I will say that I think as you move through the book, it starts sounding more and more like a thesis the further you go through. But I'm fine. I'm fine with that. I've made peace with that. Oh yes, implement feedback from the thesis examiners. So again, an advantage of it having gone through examination, you have a lot of feedback already, so you can refine further and just go ahead and apply all of the feedback. I took everything on board that the examiners suggested, and that really strengthened my work. You can also engage a professional editor to look at the style and structure. So you can look up the Institute of Professional Editors, which is a professional association for Australian and New Zealand editors. They have a website. You can find an editor that does work in your field, who's read work, from a similar perspective or has experience already in that area. And you can reach out and start talking about what process they use, like when would they like to see the manuscript, but also quotes. So that does cost money. I think it's an hourly charge. I was lucky enough to have some funding from the university for publication. I was given about a $500 fund, which I didn't end up using actually. But trying to look for some publication money to engage an editor would be really, really useful. So during this process, you'll be liaising with the publisher's project coordinator. So if you have any questions, reach out to them. Okay, so anything about permissions, fair use, what's actually needed, so deliverables, deadlines, things like that. And speaking of deadlines, have a realistic timeline. Okay, so I signed the contract in mid-August, and I said, yeah, cool, I'll give you the manuscript in 2 months' time, so mid-October. Then life happened, teaching happened. That was pushed to mid-November, which then became early February, and then April, and then I finally submitted the manuscript on the 30th of July. So I was really lucky. They were really flexible and understanding. I think if you were trying to align the book release with an event, then you might not have that flexibility. But yeah, give yourself enough time, be forgiving of yourself as well. Don't beat yourself up about it. If you're not going to make the deadline, just email the publisher and they'll probably be fine with it and they'll push it back. Okay, no point like angsting over it. So yeah, give yourself enough time. So review and proofs. Yeah, so the manuscript was sent to the series editors who approved it for the Palgrave Fan Study series without any further changes or comments. This was a month and a half after I submitted it. So when I received this email saying they accepted it without changes, my first reaction was suspicion. I was like, do they not want to sell any books? Do they just want to get rid of it? Like what? And so I asked my supervisor, I said, hey, is this normal? Should I be querying this? And she said, no, you idiot, it's a good thing. Take it. So I will say, I don't think it was accepted without changes because, I'm a brilliant writer or anything like that. I think it's because it started as a thesis and it had gone through examination and had already gone through peer review. And so it had multiple iterations and multiple phases of refinement to get to that point. So yeah, I think that's another advantage of starting from your thesis. And then I liaised with the production supervisor for the book proofs and any text corrections. So this period can be quite quick. The turnaround can be anything from like 48 hours to a week. They would like confirmation and approval quite quickly. But once I approved the proofs, it was published about 3 weeks later. So January 2025. Yeah, so that's my journey with my book. I'm happy to share any of my documents as examples or reference for anyone. Just get in touch. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful. I had absolutely no idea of most of that process, so it was very useful. I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions, but we do have one in the chat from Chris that I'll just read out first. So he says, it seems to me that there might be some decent overlap between competing works and potential peer reviewers. Is there anything we should keep in mind regarding differentiating between who/what we suggest in one versus the other?
Yeah, so so when you talk about competing works, sometimes you want to be selective and talk of like present works that are very loosely related. And maybe what, that you think is not as good as your work, maybe in a very blunt way. But really, you're trying to market your work. So being quite selective with that. And then also with suggesting the peer reviewers, yeah, obviously you don't want to have that conflict of interest. You don't want to ask a competitor to review your work for the same publisher. So hopefully if they have work with a different publisher, sure, go ahead. Or from a different country would be great.
Does anyone have any? Yeah, Jonathan.
Hi there, thanks very much. Excuse the lack of video. Evangeline, that was really great. I appreciated that. I just wondered whether you might be willing to elaborate just a little bit on that sort of change of style of writing between the PhD and the book. I'm in a little bit of a similar situation, writing about climate action, where I think maybe there's potential for a bit more of a general interest. And my supervisor has suggested that I'd be cutting my citations by a significant amount. I was just wondering whether you might like to talk about that and really sort of related ideas.
Yeah, sure. Cutting down citations, that reminds me of one of my examiner comments. They did say that I had a mountain of theory in my thesis, which does not sound great, but like that was just my thesis. Yeah, so changing it from a very academic target audience to the general public, I would say you would want it to be a lot warmer. Taking that academic tone out, but still, in informed argument. I guess changing that style also gives you some room to add a bit more flair, so a bit more personality to the writing, where it almost comes across as commentary as well. So maybe leaning more into that rather than academic thesis might help. But yeah, I mean those would be my ideas around that.
Thank you, that's great.
We've got another question from Jay in the chat, which says, did you hold your thesis back from publication when you submitted? So I guess, is that in terms of journal articles that you're asking, Jay?
Sorry, I just saw it there in the outline for the book as well. But when you submitted your thesis, was it as a single document, the single thesis rather than by article, Evangeline? Yep.
Yeah.
And did you reserve that from publication? So sometimes after they're submitted and accepted, they're published and available, like depending on the university, but through our university we do. Did you reserve and hold yours back from publication?
Yeah, so we have the UTS repository for theses. So I applied to have it embargoed. And that was a very easy process. Like they honestly did not need any reasons, like much documentation at all. So you just apply for an embargo. And that is something that you put in the full proposal as well.
Thank you. And then we've got a question in the chat from Rachel, which says, I have also heard about the need to remove/reduce or change the introduction and especially the research methods section. How did you go about that?
I didn't. I didn't. It's still in there. I didn't call it methodology. I called it a queer ethnography. Yeah, and so I mean, I still have a lot of, this is how participants were recruited, the questions that I ask them, things like that. Because yes, I do want it to be accessible to a general audience, but I know that most people reading it will still be academics. But I think that makes that chapter kind of optional for people who are not, academically inclined or reading it for that reason. They can just skip that and the rest of the book will still make sense. My friendship group, they're passing the book around to all of them. None of them work in academia. They work in like health and sciences. And I don't ask them if they read that chapter. Maybe I will now. But yeah, it's still an academic book, so it still needs that. But you could frame it slightly differently, like instead of using terminology like methodology, things like that.
We've got about 2 more minutes left. Are there any final questions for either Laura or Evangeline about the process? No, just a lot of comments in the chat saying thank you, and it was super, super helpful, which I would like to second. So thank you so much to Laura and thank you so much to Evangeline. It was really, really useful, and hopefully everyone's going to be leaving here with a little bit more knowledge, a little bit of a greater practical insight into what the post-PhD period actually looks like. Yeah, we're really grateful for you sharing your expertise and experiences with us today. And thank you everyone so much for coming. This presentation is being recorded, so it will be available online on the TASA website as well. So feel free to look it up later if you ever need. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for hosting us.
Thanks, everyone.
My details are online, so if anyone thinks of questions later, please feel free to shoot me an email.
Yep. Ditto.